The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, a weight that pressed on everyone's chest. Caitlyn sat silently, her gaze locked ahead though her mind raced. Her family's bitter dispute over her late grandfather's estate was playing out before her, and each word spoken only deepened the divide. Her sister Olivia was fighting tooth and nail, accusing Caitlyn of manipulating their grandfather in his final days. But Caitlyn knew something they didn't. She held the key, the trust that would change everything. A trust sealed years ago, hidden beneath layers of betrayal, lies, and unspoken truths. Caitlyn could feel the eyes of her parents on her Mark and Deborah, waiting for her to crack, expecting her to show fear. But inside she felt a calm, a quiet knowing that this was only the beginning. They were about to learn that Caitlyn had been the one pulling the strings all along, and they had never even seen her coming. The courtroom was thick with emotion, a cloud of anger and desperation hanging over every word. Olivia's lawyer had just made another accusation, and Caitlyn could feel the weight of the room pressing in on her. The tension was palpable, thick enough to slice through. Her mother's eyes burned with a mix of fear and fury. Her father's jaw was clenched tight, the muscles in his neck straining with the effort to stay calm. But Caitlyn, she felt nothing but the quiet hum of anticipation, a steady calm that felt almost unnatural in the storm of emotions swirling around her. She knew something they didn't. She knew that the game was about to change. Her fingers brushed lightly against the cold, sealed envelope sitting quietly on the table in front of her. It was the key to everything. The answer to all the questions they'd been fighting over. Caitlyn's heart didn't race. It didn't even skip a beat. She had been preparing for this moment for years. She could almost hear the clock ticking down to this very second each tick, a countdown to the inevitable. And then without warning, the heavy oak doors creaked open, breaking the suffocating silence. A figure stepped into the room, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos inside. He didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He didn't even glance in their direction. The man was dressed in a drab, ill-fitting gray suit, the fabric clearly a size too big for him, the sleeves of his jacket hanging slightly too low over his wrists. He carried a battered briefcase that looked like it had survived at least a few decades of hard use. Nothing about him screamed authority or wealth, and yet, as he walked straight to the clerk's desk, there was an air of calm about him, an almost unsettling professionalism. Caitlyn's eyes followed his every step, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to look around the room to know what was happening. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere as soon as the stranger entered. The heated air, thick with family drama, suddenly felt cooler, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. The room seemed to hold its breath. Olivia's lawyer was the first to react, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor as he shot to his feet, his voice laced with disbelief. "Objection!" He blurted, his voice thick with confusion. "We've not been notified of any corporate trustee." Caitlyn's parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and even Olivia looked momentarily rattled. Caitlyn's hand, still resting lightly on the envelope, tightened just a fraction. She was ready. The moment had arrived. The stranger, the trustee, turned to the judge, his voice dry, almost monotone, cutting through the thick fog of tension in the room. "Your Honor, I represent the Trust Department of Hawthorne National Bank. We are the successor trustee for the estate in question." The words hit like a thunderclap. The heat in the room froze. For a brief moment, everything stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. The judge, never looking up from the envelope he was slowly tearing open, waved off the objections without a second thought. "Sit down, counsel," he said, his voice calm but firm. The silence that followed was almost deafening, the kind of silence that makes every small sound seem impossibly loud. Caitlyn's heart beat slowly now, each thrum in her chest steady sure. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The truth was about to be revealed. The judge's eyes moved from the envelope, now open in his hands, to the room full of tense, expectant faces. For a brief moment, he seemed to savor the stillness, the silence that had swept through the courtroom. Olivia's lawyer stood at the ready, his hands clutching the edge of the table as though he were prepared to strike. His face, flushed with agitation, was a mask of frustration and disbelief. Caitlyn watched him closely, noticing the way his chest rose and fell, how his fingers twitched. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being powerless. The room was suspended in a moment of almost unbearable tension. Then the judge cleared his throat and turned his spectacles down toward the document in his hands. He scanned it for a moment, his fingers brushing the paper lightly as he read the terms with meticulous care. He flipped a page and looked up, his gaze cold and direct, met Olivia's, and Caitlyn could see the confusion spread across her sister's face, followed by a flash of something darker. Frustration, fear. The judge's voice broke the silence, cutting through the air like a sharp knife. "Miss Vale," he began, his tone even, but somehow heavier than before. "Are you aware that your grandfather's assets were placed into an irrevocable trust prior to his death?" The question hung in the air like a thick fog. Olivia's mouth opened and closed as if she were trying to find the words, but none came. Instead, she blurted out in a shrill, desperate tone, "He didn't know what he was doing. That's why we're here." Her voice cracked, but Caitlyn could see it wasn't the crack of genuine emotion. It was the crack of someone who knew they had just been caught in their own lie. The judge didn't respond immediately. He simply turned his attention back to the document in his hand, his eyes scanning it once more. His fingers shifted the paper with a slow, deliberate motion as he cleared his throat again, his voice now steady as he read aloud from the document. Article 9, Section C, he said, the no contest clause. Any beneficiary who seeks to obtain an adjudication in any proceeding attacking the validity of this trust, or who challenges the competency of the grantor, shall immediately forfeit any and all interest in the trust estate, treating said beneficiary as if they had predeceased the grantor without issue. The words landed in the courtroom like a thunderclap. Caitlyn could feel the shift in the air. The tension that had once crackled with anticipation now dissolved into a cold, eerie silence. She watched as Olivia's lawyer froze, his face, paling, his eyes widening with the realization of what had just happened. He had set the trap in motion, pulling the pin on a grenade without understanding the full impact. Caitlyn's eyes flicked toward her parents, and she could see their faces fall. Her mother, Deborah, was blinking rapidly, her expression flickering between confusion and disbelief. Mark, however, was another story. His face was contorted with anger, his jaw clenched so tight that it looked as though his teeth might shatter. He was trying to hide it, trying to keep his usual composure, but it was impossible. The truth had just hit him, and it was like a gut punch. He looked at Caitlyn for the first time since the trustee had entered his eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperation. He had always thought of himself as the one in control, the one who could manipulate the situation. But in this moment, he was the one who had been outsmarted. Caitlyn didn't flinch. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply kept her eyes on the judge, the tiniest curve of a smile pulling at the corner of her lips. She had known this moment was coming. She had known all along. As the judge finished reading, the room remained still, a suffocating kind of stillness hanging over everything. Olivia's lawyer stammered, his voice shaky with a mixture of panic and disbelief. "Your Honor," he began, but the judge's voice cut him off before he could even finish the sentence. "Sit down, counsel," the judge said firmly, not even looking at him, as he returned to the document, sliding it into the folder with a swift motion. The sudden movement seemed to snap the entire room back into focus. "The motion for emergency control is denied," the judge continued. "The trust is active, the trustee is present, the assets are secure." He paused, letting the words settle in the room. Then he looked up, meeting Caitlyn's gaze directly. She didn't look away. She wasn't shaken. There was a quiet satisfaction in her eyes, but no triumph, just the calm of someone who had been quietly, patiently waiting for this moment. Olivia's lawyer, realizing the battle was over, sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping with defeat. The tension in the room shifted again, this time from the frantic energy of the fight to the stunned realization of the consequences. Caitlyn looked at her parents, Mark in particular, as they sat there in stunned silence. Her mother's face was pale, her lips trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to shrink in his seat, his face now ashen, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. The man who had spent his life bulldozing others, the one who had held power over Caitlyn for years, was now the one being crushed by the weight of his own actions. Caitlyn knew in that moment that this was just the beginning. The trap had been set, and the no contest clause was only the first of many things they hadn't counted on. But for now, it was enough. The look on her father's face, stricken and small, was enough to remind her that she was finally in control. Caitlyn sat in the courtroom, her gaze fixed ahead, but her mind had drifted back to another time. The years of manipulation, the weight of guilt placed on her shoulders, the endless feeling that she was never enough, never doing enough. She had always been the reliable one, the one who took care of things. It was a role she didn't choose, but one that had been thrust upon her when she was just a child. It started with the bankruptcy. She could still hear the sharp crack of her father's voice that day, the words etched in her memory forever. "Because of you." Mark had roared, his face red with fury. "If we hadn't spent that capital on her teeth, we could have saved the company. We could have kept everything." At 14, Caitlyn had been an innocent victim of her parents' financial mismanagement. The surgery for her misaligned jaw had been necessary, but her parents had made her believe it was the reason they lost everything. She had spent years internalizing the guilt, believing she was the cause of their downfall. While they wept for their failed business, Caitlyn's pain was dismissed, her swollen face ignored. She was the scapegoat, the money pit they could blame for every failure, every setback. It was easier for them to point at her than to look at themselves. After all, they were the ones who'd mismanaged the business, who'd spent recklessly on vacations, who'd chosen personal luxuries over business stability. But Caitlyn didn't know that yet. She spent her teenage years taking on the role of the family fixer, always trying to make up for her own perceived sins. Caitlyn paid the bills when they couldn't make rent. She covered their grocery expenses when her mother squandered the food budget on networking lunches. Every cent she earned, she handed over, convinced that if she sacrificed enough, if she bled enough, they would forgive her for being the reason they lost everything. She wasn't just paying for their debts, she was paying for her own survival in their eyes, desperately hoping it would balance the scales, hoping it would undo the damage they had so cruelly pinned on her. The years had slipped by like this one sacrifice after another, till she was in her 20s, still paying for things that had nothing to do with her. It wasn't until she started working for someone who actually understood how money worked that the fog began to lift. Her boss, a man who didn't live in a world of excuses and self-deception, taught Caitlyn how to look at the numbers, how to see the truth that had always been hidden beneath the surface. It was then that she ran the numbers herself, the ones her parents had never shown her, the ones they had always kept from her. The $12,000 surgery hadn't ruined them. Their bankruptcy hadn't been caused by bad luck or Caitlyn's medical expenses. No, it had been caused by fraud, by embezzlement, by the reckless misuse of capital. Caitlyn had been living in a lie, and for the first time she saw her parents for who they really were, not victims of circumstances, but perpetrators of their own destruction. They hadn't lost everything because of her teeth. They'd lost it because they were greedy, careless, and dishonest. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Everything she had been made to believe was a lie. The years of guilt, the endless self-blame, it all came crashing down in an instant. She hadn't been the burden. They had. But even then, it wasn't easy to accept. The guilt still lingered buried deep in her chest like a knot she couldn't untie. Caitlyn had spent so long carrying their shame, so long sacrificing her own happiness to appease them, that the idea of standing up to them felt foreign, like a betrayal in itself. How could she, after everything they'd told her, everything she had done for them? Yet the more she understood, the more she saw through the illusion they had built around her, the more the truth became undeniable. Her parents weren't just irresponsible, they had used her. They had manipulated her into believing she was the cause of their failures, when all along they were the ones who had been playing a game she didn't know the rules to. They had drained her emotionally and financially, and Caitlyn had been so blinded by her need for their approval that she hadn't even seen it. Sitting in that courtroom now, the weight of everything she had been through hung heavy on her shoulders. But it wasn't the crushing weight it used to be. It was different now. Caitlyn wasn't the girl they had broken, the girl who believed she was responsible for everything that went wrong. She wasn't the child they could manipulate anymore. She was something else, now something stronger, something far more dangerous. Caitlyn had spent years paying off their debts, believing it was her responsibility, her burden to bear. But now, as the truth unfolded before her, she understood one thing. It was time to stop paying. It was time to stop sacrificing herself. And she wasn't going to let them use her any longer. The courtroom had been tense, every person on edge, but it was as though time slowed when the trustee reached into his briefcase. Caitlyn sat back in her chair, her expression calm, almost detached, as the man pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. It looked old, fragile, even its spine cracked from years of use. He placed it down on the clerk's desk with a deliberate motion, then turned to the judge, his voice as dry as the paper in his hands. Your Honor, this is the personal journal of the decedent Mr. Vale. The contents of this journal provide a detailed account of his state of mind leading up to his death, and it will be entered as evidence. The courtroom was utterly still. The murmurs of the crowd, the soft shuffle of papers, everything seemed to fade into the background as Caitlyn's gaze locked onto the journal. She had known about it, had known what it contained. It was the very thing that would shatter her parents' carefully constructed narrative, this story they had been telling for years about how they were the victims, how Caitlyn had been the one who had taken advantage of Grandpa. Olivia shifted in her seat, her hand twitching as though she wanted to reach for something, anything to hold onto. Mark, on the other hand, seemed frozen. He stared at the journal with a sick look in his eyes, his jaw clenching tighter as the truth began to inch closer. The trustee opened the journal slowly, as if savoring the moment, his fingers tracing the first page before he began to read aloud in a steady, almost indifferent tone. March 12th, the trustee read Olivia's birthday, called Lyft to sing happy birthday, sent a voicemail, no call back. He turned the page, continuing the slow, methodical unraveling of their lies. June 19th, Father's Day, waited for Mark. He said he would stop by after golf. Never showed. Caitlyn made steak. He paused, looking up at Mark, his face a mask of quiet fury. One outgoing text from the decedent at 8 p.m. asking, "Are you coming?" No reply. Caitlyn could feel the weight of each word hanging in the air, the finality of it. It was like watching a house slowly crumble, the foundation eroded by the truth. Each entry in the journal was a hammer blow to her parents' version of the story. The journal revealed the truth of Grandpa's last years, the truth they had fought so hard to bury. Caitlyn didn't flinch. She didn't show a flicker of emotion. She had already known this. She had known what her parents had done, and now the world was about to see it too. As the trustee flipped through the pages, the revelations continued. Each entry painted a picture of a man abandoned by the people who were supposed to love him most. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The decedent's health was failing. He had requested a visit from his family. Mark and Deborah arrived drunk, pounding on the door, shouting for him to open up. His heart rate hit 160. The trustee paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Caitlyn kept the door locked and did not let them in. The decedent was terrified. Caitlyn heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, the sharp sound cutting through the stillness. She could see the horror on her face, but it wasn't the kind of horror one might expect. It wasn't the kind of reaction someone would have if they were truly remorseful. No, it was the kind of horror that came when you were caught, when the lies you had spent years spinning unraveled before you. Mark looked as though he had just been struck, his face pale and blotchy, as he sat there, stunned and unable to reconcile the man he had portrayed himself to be with the truth that was now being laid bare before everyone. The judge's voice broke the silence, cutting through the air like a knife. "Do you have any response to this?" he asked, his tone sharp. But Mark didn't respond. He couldn't. His face was a picture of disbelief, the story he had been telling himself for years, crumbling into dust around him. He had painted himself as the devoted son, the one who had been wronged, the one who had been kept from his father in his final days. But now, with the journal in front of him, those lies couldn't survive. There was nowhere for them to hide. The record of his abandonment was laid out for everyone to see. Caitlyn remained still. She didn't need to say anything. She had been carrying this burden for so long, had watched them rewrite the narrative of their lives, and now finally the truth was emerging. She had never been the villain. She had never been the one who had caused all the pain. No, that had been them, Mark and Deborah, the ones who had turned their backs on Grandpa in his final years. The ones who had neglected him when he needed them most. And now Caitlyn was watching as their carefully constructed facade shattered. She didn't feel the satisfaction she had expected. Instead, she felt a kind of heavy, quiet relief. She had known the truth all along, but it had taken this moment, this journal, to finally expose the lies, to show the world what she had been forced to carry for years. The trustee unflinching closed the journal and turned to the judge. "I am marking this as Exhibit B," he said calmly. "The decedent's personal log, colloquially referred to as the rejection ledger. The AT&T phone records will be submitted as Exhibit C." The room was quiet now, save for the sound of the papers being shuffled. Olivia sat frozen, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide. Mark, for the first time in his life, seemed small. It was a moment of reckoning, one that had been a long time coming. Caitlyn didn't need to say a word. The truth had already spoken for her. The room was thick with tension as Olivia's lawyer fumbled for words, his face pale, his voice shaking with desperation. "Your Honor, we must ask to suspend the trust's validity. We have evidence to show that the decedent was not of sound mind when he signed this." His words, meant to undermine the trust Caitlyn had so carefully protected, hung in the air like a challenge. But Caitlyn remained calm, her hands folded neatly on the table, her posture straight, the very picture of composure. She'd been waiting for this moment, the final blow to her family's deceit. The trustee standing behind her slid a thick folder across the table, the pages inside shifting with a crisp, undeniable finality. "Your Honor, the decedent underwent a series of capacity evaluations 2 hours before the trust was amended." The trustee said, his voice steady as he pushed forward the affidavit that would end the game. The evaluations were conducted by 2 forensic psychiatrists who found him lucid, oriented, and fully aware of his finances and family dynamics. Caitlyn's eyes met the judge's for a split second. She didn't need to say a word. The evidence spoke for itself. The video recordings from the psychiatric evaluations, clear and irrefutable, were now part of the record. Grandpa's voice, calm and sharp in those final moments, declared his intent to protect his legacy from those who would squander it. It was the very evidence that Caitlyn had known would turn the tide. She had anticipated this fight, and now it was ending in her favor. Olivia's lawyer sputtered his objections, growing more frantic. But he was 89. He was on heavy pain medication. This doesn't prove competency. It doesn't... Enough. The judge interjected his voice, colder than Caitlyn had ever heard it. He turned to the trustee. "Does the trustee have any evidence regarding the decedent's mental state at the time of the signing?" The trustee opened the folder with a precise motion, laying out the signed capacity exam and accompanying video evidence. The judge reviewed the documents and then looked back at Olivia's lawyer, who was now visibly sweating. Caitlyn could see the lawyer's demeanor shifting from confident to desperate, the cracks in his argument widening with each passing moment. The judge's gaze never wavered. "The capacity exam is clear. The decedent was competent when the trust was amended. There is no doubt." At that, the weight of the room seemed to shift. Olivia's head snapped toward Caitlyn, her eyes wide with realization. The trap she had set, the lies she had fed the court were crumbling. Caitlyn didn't react, didn't flinch. She simply leaned back in her chair, watching as Olivia's world began to unravel. For the first time in years, Caitlyn felt the tide of control moving away from her family and toward her. The judge's words were the final nail in the coffin. Your motion is denied. The trust stands as it was amended. The courtroom was dead silent for a moment before the ripple of shock and disbelief spread across the room. Mark looked at Caitlyn, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear, his earlier bravado completely gone. He had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and there was nothing left to do but accept the consequences. Olivia, too, was still her face pale as the gravity of what had just occurred settled in. Caitlyn sat there perfectly composed, her expression neutral. She had fought this battle for so long, and now it was over. The weight of the years of manipulation, the guilt, the blame, it was all slipping away. No longer the scapegoat, no longer the one who had to bear the burden of her family's mistakes. The moment of victory was quiet, almost imperceptible, but Caitlyn felt it deeply. This was the moment she reclaimed her agency, the moment she took back control of her life. The judge's final words echoed in her ears. The trust is valid, the petition is dismissed. There will be no further hearings on this matter. Caitlyn didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had already won. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal. Olivia, once so sure of her control, found herself crushed beneath the weight of her lies. With the trust secured and the fraudulent claims exposed, she faced not just the loss of her inheritance, but also a mounting pile of legal fees and a financial ruin that loomed over her like an impending storm. The aftermath of her actions was a bitter pill she had no choice but to swallow. Caitlyn, on the other hand, felt a strange stillness wash over her. The battle had been long, the emotional toll heavy, but now it was over. She had finally freed herself from the toxic grip of her family. For years, she had been the scapegoat, the one who took on their failures, their mistakes, and their financial burdens. She had been made to believe that she was the cause of their downfall, that their misery was her fault, but no longer. The truth had come out, and with it, the weight of years of manipulation, guilt, and resentment had fallen away. Caitlyn sat quietly, staring at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen. It was time. The last remnants of her connection to the family she had once tried so desperately to please were gone. She scrolled through her contacts and found their names. The names of the people who had used her, who had drained her without ever giving anything in return. And with one swift motion, she deleted them. Mark, Deborah, Olivia, gone. Just like that. There was no emotion, no anger, just a quiet sense of finality. Caitlyn had done what was necessary for her own survival, for her own peace of mind. The years of carrying their burdens, the guilt, the shame, it all faded into the past. She had broken free, and in doing so, she had reclaimed her life. For the first time in a long time, Caitlyn felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before freedom, a fresh start, a clean slate. And as she stood up staring at the screen, she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. The door had closed on her past, and the future was hers to shape. Caitlyn's journey wasn't just about reclaiming an inheritance. It was about finding herself, shedding the weight of years of manipulation, and finally stepping into her own power. It's a story that resonates with so many of us facing the truth, finding the courage to break free and walking away from what no longer serves us. Caitlyn's victory is more than just a personal one. It's a reminder that we all have the strength to rewrite our own stories, no matter how tangled the past may be. If Caitlyn's story struck a chord with you, if you've ever found yourself carrying someone else's burdens or questioning your place in a family or relationship, take a moment to reflect on what you deserve. Maybe it's time to let go of what's holding you back too. If you'd like to see where Caitlyn's story leads, or if you've been inspired to share your own experiences, feel free to leave a comment or like this video. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're ready to join us for the next chapter of this journey, don't forget to subscribe. It's not just about a story, it's about building a community that understands, supports, and grows together. Whatever your journey looks like, remember, it's never too late to reclaim your freedom.